My name is Leesa Shrader, and I'm right now I'm the director of the Mercy Corps AgriFin programs based out of our hub office here in Nairobi. And so for the last 6 years, I've been working here across 5 countries in Africa to help about 150 partners design, test, and scale digital services for farmers with financial services kind of at the core. My professional journey started over 30 years ago in financial inclusion. I've always known about microsave. Microsave's always been a touch point and a learning point for me. I started my first microfinance institution when I was 26 in Russia. It was the first microfinance institution ever in the former Soviet Union, and it was focused on women and really kind of helping women rebuild their lives after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And for many of them, they had no idea how to apply for loans. They had no idea how to grow a business. So it was an amazing journey that's taken me to about 55 countries around the world now. So it's kind of been the focus of my life, has been, and the purpose for my work has been helping people connect to resources so that they can grow their businesses, they can, build opportunity for their families, they can build opportunities for their communities, and build stronger communities, stronger countries. So as I said, I've worked in a wide range of regions. I spent many years in Asia, and 14 years in Asia, working in financial inclusion. And that's really where I kind of ran into technology, into the power of digital technology to transform how we could reach people, how many people we could reach. You could see the adoption of technology across Asia. I've worked in countries like China with Alibaba. And I think some of the most important achievements for me maybe happened in Asia first. I launched 2 commercial banks, one of which was ultimately acquired by Alibaba, and understanding the power of technology to reach people at very low cost, to make products and services really accessible, understanding the power of data and the power of technology innovation to reach the unreached. So a really important part of my journey happened in Asia when I started working with microfinance institutions with farmers, hundreds of thousands of farmers. In Indonesia and the Philippines, you have poor people, poor farmers stretched across thousands and thousands of islands. It's so difficult to reach them. It's so difficult to make resources real for farmers at the last mile. And we started to understand that the cell phone and the digital technology were a big part of that. And so we launched commercial banks that brought technology to farmers at the last mile. And ultimately, my journey has kind of led me here. With the development of the AgriFin programs, what we've been trying to do is harness technology to connect farmers to resources, to markets. I moved to Kenya over 6 years ago and loved working here in Africa, being part of the tech innovation in the Silicon Savannah that's looking at all of the problems, the core issues that have separated farmers from markets and resources and made them risky and held them in poverty. It's been such an honor working alongside so many tech innovators and so many great institutions here in Africa. Our work at AgriFin now is reaching over 16 million farmers through 150 partners that we help to design, test, and scale services. And that's been a really great journey. I think the most important thing for me over the last 30 years of doing this is to keep my eyes open to innovation, stay curious, really to learn. It's a difficult environment for women sometimes, and women in leadership, but we definitely know that women are half the market, and we've got to make services work for women. We need more women in leadership of enterprises and programming. So for me, many times people would laugh at me as the only woman in the room, but you just have to kind of keep with it and keep holding our clients at the center. So yeah, it's been a great journey to lead me here to Kenya and working across Africa, and it's an exciting time, very, very exciting time for inclusion. I think that agriculture is the last big, frontier. It's the most difficult sector, I think, in the world, all over the world. Agriculture is critical to feeding people, but it's also fraught with risk. Here in Africa, there are so many smallholder farmers living in poverty. 70% of the food that's consumed in Africa is grown by smallholder farmers, but they're the most likely to live in poverty. They're the least likely to have access to services. So in terms of achievements, I would say that, reaching 16 million farmers with digital services here in Africa has been at the top of my list. We've worked with 150 partners. One of the most important in our journey has been Safaricom, working with Safaricom to develop the Digifarm platform. Safaricom was already reaching 70% of the Kenyan population with M-Pesa. M-Pesa has moved all around the world. And, their challenge was, how do we take this mobile money revolution and make it work for people in rural areas? How do we make it work for them as farmers? So this journey with Safaricom and so many of our other partners to figure out what works for farmers, to harness digital innovation in a way that can, really reach the last mile, the last frontier, has been, I would say, the most, something that I'm very proud to be a part of. We've been working at AgriFin in Asia and in Africa for the last 10 years. And I think that the emergence of digital platforms for me has been a game changer. I think the reason why digital platforms are so important is that the agricultural sector is very complex. You have thousands of value chains. You have thousands of ecological zones. You have thousands of different types of farmers. You have myriad languages. Here in Africa, we have so many borders. And so I think that what you find with platforms is that in a single instance, you can bring together so many different types of services that can, in a digital world, be adapted to the needs of each farmer. So at the center of each farmer's journey is getting the resources, whether that's money that they've saved or loans that they've gotten, or insurance to protect them. So at the core of every farmer's journey is our financial services. But they've always been the riskiest population on the face of the planet, the hardest to reach, the farthest away, smallest loans, completely seasonal, very, very risky. And so I think what platforms represent for us is the ability to bring multiple services to bear for farmers that can be tailored to their needs, whether it's in dairy or whether it's in sunflower or whether it's in horticulture. The needs of farmers are very diverse. They need to learn about different things. They need different kinds of information, market information about exactly what they are growing in exactly this location. It's been impossible to provide that information to farmers without digital tools at scale. And what this means for financial inclusion is that it begins to also reduce risks for lenders and open the opportunity to work with farmers they may never see. They may never ever go to that farm. There may never be a human being who stands on that farm in the middle of, in the middle of central or western or eastern Kenya. But through digital tools, you can learn about what that farmer is doing. Through geotagging, you can understand exactly what type of soil they're dealing with, how is the water going, and these kinds of things reduce credit risk. It also has made us, made it possible to get credit insurance, to get crop insurance to farmers and protect them against drought and flood and unexpected pest and disease. We're sitting in the middle of the biggest desert locust plague in 70 years here in East Africa, and digital tools can watch those locusts, and they can track them, and they can tell the government how to respond, and they can help lenders understand what's their risk if they go into an environment where locusts may come or may not come. And that opens the door for farmers to finally be able to get the resources that they need. We're seeing platforms do all kinds of really interesting things, including connecting farmers to markets. So a lot of buyers want to connect to smallholder farmers, but it's hard to find them. So through platforms, farmers become visible to all kinds of service providers, whether they are selling tractors. Mechanization is a huge pathway to productivity for farmers. You can get twice as many potatoes out of a field with a tractor as you can if you're hoeing, if you're using a backhoe. Same amount of inputs, same amount of potatoes in the field, but a huge difference in the ability to get potatoes out of a field. So I see platforms as a huge service delivery platform for or opportunity for farmers, and it reduces the risk and the cost for every service provider who joins a platform. They don't all have to be doing the marketing. They don't all have to be doing the onboarding for farmers, the education for farmers. Every member, every organization on a platform benefits from the platform effects. One thing that we're finding with farmers is that trusted brands are an incredibly important pathway to just acquiring farmers, to getting them to change their behaviors and adopt digital technology, and trust that that the insurance will be paid, and trust that the farmer, that the inputs will show up, and that the tractor will show up, and that the buyer will be there. So trusted brands, big players like Equity Bank, like KCB Bank, these are the types of organizations that farmers know and they believe in. Government platforms have been providing a great deal of traction for farmers. In Ethiopia, through the Agricultural Transformation Agency, reaching more than 8 million farmers. Farmers in Ethiopia trust the government, and when the government has a digital platform that multiple players can plug into, that makes a difference. Mobile network operators across Africa reach millions and millions of farmers, and adapting those services for farmers is just a step into really deepening what they do. So I think platforms are really the way to go for service delivery, but another world behind platforms is the world of digital data. Many farmers have no digital identity. They don't exist in the digital economy. So the digital data that we're starting to see come through platforms is immense, is enormous. We begin to understand, who is this farmer? What are their behaviors? This woman, she may have 10 chickens and four cattle and a half an acre of coffee and an acre of maize, and she has 3 kids. Then suddenly, through the power of digital data, we see that woman. We understand who she is, and we can understand the complexities of her agricultural business, and help her to respond to emergencies, and respond to opportunities. So I think that the digital data revolution behind platforms is an opportunity that's going to continue to grow. And it's a huge opportunity for public-private partnerships. It's a huge opportunity for lenders in the financial sector to finally be able to get into this rich world of feeding Africa, of feeding Asia, and begin to understand how to use satellite data. We have a big partnership with NASA and other organizations that are harnessing satellite data to tell us, what are the impacts of climate change. We're being told that we've got 10 more cycles, agricultural cycles, before the effects of climate change become insurmountable. That is terrifying. I think that one of the benefits of platforms is they can grow very large, very fast. They can reach large numbers of farmers with the kind of data that they need to change their behaviors in a changing climate. So, in some areas, something may have grown well for the last 100 years, but now it doesn't. The soil erosion, the effects of climate change mean that the farmer's got to farm something else. So how do you help a farmer understand what to farm, how to farm? How do you link them to resources when it's the first time they've ever grown sorghum? These are the kinds of challenges that we are going to be facing in an accelerated basis. And the scale, the range of products and services, the data and products and services, the identity of the farmers are all scale pathways for us to address the climate challenge that we face. So I think platforms are going to be really important there. And it's going to be very important for government, financial sector, agricultural sectors, communications sectors, innovation sectors, and farmer-facing organizations to come together and figure out how platforms can transform agriculture for Africa. one of our basic core hypothesis or mantra is that no single player can do this alone in agriculture, particularly with climate risk around us and the risks of COVID. COVID has changed a lot of financial institutions' ability to get to farmers, and it does change risk factors. So, in terms of partnerships, I think that governments have, a critical mandate in agriculture. They have a critical mandate in financial inclusion, in poverty alleviation. The role of government is absolutely critical, but they don't necessarily have control over what the private sector does. Government has a lot of data, but they always say, oh, but the private sector has a lot of data, and the private sector is delivering these services. Government is delivering these services. I think what we realize is that to be catalytic, you have to have partnerships. And they can be private sector, public sector. But one of the things that's most important is to identify a clear value proposition across partnerships and figure out how to speak the same language. So a lot of times government is talking about public policy and they're talking about long-term food balance sheets. This is not the language of private sector that are trying to get services and, turn a profit working with farmers today. So there's a bridge to be there's a bridge that we need to cross between public and private sector. They're not competitors. They're joint enablers. And I think when you can get to that space where you're speaking the same language and you identify that it's a win-win-win scenario, then you see partnerships work. Has to win for this side of the partnership, government has to win for the private sector, and it has to win for farmers, or none of it will go. I think that one thing that's really important for government is to see private sector as a positive partnership, but also really stand up for farmers, stand up for the poor, stand up for data protection, stand up for to bring in strategic subsidy when it's needed. The private sector can't do everything for farmers. There is a role, particularly in COVID and climate, for government subsidy to bring in. So yeah, I think that partnerships on digital platforms can be easier. It can be harder, but the two major things you have to address when you look at these partnerships are, first, what's the value proposition for everybody? What is the win-win-win? What are we doing? And then the second, what we've learned is that data sharing is critical on digital platforms. And if you don't address the data sharing protocols and constraints up front, you can spend a year on a partnership and it will fall through because nobody will share data, or these guys will share data, but these guys won't share data. So I think, identifying the win-win-win and getting serious about data sharing to enable meaningful partnerships are the two big pieces of learning that I've seen. It has been a roller coaster for the last 6 years or 5.5 years of working with Safaricom. I think that one of the things that's great about mobile network operators is that they're very, very agile. They're willing to get out and test things, and they're willing to fail and redesign. So I think that what's been great about Safaricom was that they already had a massive footprint with M-Pesa. They had rural agent networks that they could tap. Those were huge assets. They knew that the farmers were out there, and the farmers weren't really using M-Pesa or Safaricom services to the extent that urban populations were. So when we came together working with Digifarm, Safaricom knew that something special, something different had to happen in order for that organization to be catalytic for people in rural areas. 70% of the population in Kenya lives in rural areas. Massive numbers of people in Kenya are engaged in smallholder farming. So they came at it with an open eye and a lot of assets and a great brand, but no idea how to reach farmers. So they'd been kicking the idea around for Digifarm for a couple of years, and nothing had really come together. And what we suggested to them was to really go go to be farmer-centric, to use human-centered design, to stop trying to design products for farmers in a boardroom in Nairobi and start going out to the field and listening to farmers. There were a lot of ideas of what farmers needed, but none of it was really validated with farmers. So the first step, and I think that I would never regret, I would never rewind that first 6 months of just very, very deep human-centered design and listening and having I think we tested 35 different product prototypes for Digifarm in that time. We listened, we designed prototypes, we took them back out, we listened some more, we made sure that we were listening to 50% women, 50% men, and we came up with some, really surprising quick wins for Digifarm. Farmers wanted to learn. They wanted really good inputs that were high quality. Maybe they wanted to borrow. They definitely wanted to save. They were happy to work on digital because they wanted things to be cashless. So there were some things that we learned in that first round that carried forward into a very successful minimum viable product launch for Digifarm, where we expected to reach 60,000 farmers in 6 months, and we reached 200,000 farmers in 6 weeks. And suddenly Safaricom was like, wow, okay, there's a there. Let's take this forward. And so the journey with Safaricom has been really interesting. It's been always farmer-centric, always listening to what farmers want, and always willing to test, fail, iterate, test again, keep going. So I think we've helped Safaricom broker more than 15 partnerships on Digifarm and 4 major product launches. So those product launches, the first one was, learning and inputs. The second one was really around input credit. The third one was around market access. And then the fourth one was around smart farming and dealing with, climate risks and starting to, really bring smart advisory into the environment. So I think if we could rewind, Digifarm took a lot of hits, especially with the credit portfolio and the market portfolio, because the smart farming advisory wasn't there yet. Insurance came way too late. Soil testing came way too late. Weather information came way too late. If we could rewind, I would have put in the inputs and the advisory. Then I would have put in smart farming to help the farmers, do the right thing and protect themselves against drought, disease, pest, flood, and then go in and start doing the loans. Another thing that we learned was, Digifarm was all credit scoring, and so we had a long distance to travel to convince financial institutions that credit scoring can work for smallholder farmers. So I think that managing a lot of the risks earlier would have made that credit scoring process and the lending process more smooth. Would have taken less hits, less shots to the jaw, and fewer losses. But again, I just have to applaud Safaricom and the partners on the platform. Arifu, iProcure, Medii, iCow, Farm Drive. So many organizations were in there constantly. Every single organization on the platform was constantly innovating and growing. And Safaricom grows fast. So I think one of the hard things on Digifarm was taking young tech innovators and put them on a platform as big as Safaricom, and they were asked to stretch and grow very, very fast. So I think that one of the things that we should have done earlier, a rewind, probably would have been to bring in more partners earlier, save a lot of the young tech companies a lot of the stress, and definitely to understand the power of data. There were so many problems we could have solved if we had been more agile in looking at data analytics. Things like gender inclusion, things like new value chains being added, new geographies being added. A lot of that we could have, but let's live and learn. And again, you have to really applaud Safaricom for being out there and ready to innovate. I think we're working with 15 different organizations that we would say are digital platform providers. So, they're holding a platform and multiple organizations are coming in and leveraging that platform to reach smallholder farmers and expanding the range of services. So you're right, Digifarm is just one example of many. It was an early example. It scaled very fast. It hit a lot of problems. They kind of keep on going. It's still a work in progress. They're still trying to figure things out. So, in terms of the uptake and the active use, we've learned a lot from all 15 of the partners. One of the things that we've learned is that that the client onboarding, the farmer onboarding experience is extremely important. So, in the beginning, Digifarm had, and many of our other partners had a lot more men signed up originally than women, and we learned quickly that that a lot of how the mobile network operators, we work with Halotel and MTN and many other mobile network operators, they're used to signing up people for SIM cards, on market day in a market town, and what that does is that bends the entire platform toward adoption by men. And a lot of women are, they have limited mobility. They're not the ones necessarily who are going on market day. And so, so one thing that we learned was that in order to make the platforms more inclusive, you had to meet farmers where they were. And that involves, all of the different players trying to operate platforms into really understanding what are the best ways for them to reach farmers. And for banks, that's a different question than for mobile network operators or payment companies or agricultural companies or government agencies. But one of the most important things to develop is what we would call a go-to-market strategy. And the go-to-market strategy needs to take into account, the different value chains and where they are and how they work. And farmer organizations often are very heavily dominated by men. So what Digifarm did that made a big difference was when they found a women's cooperative as one of their partners for onboarding farmers, and they started onboarding farmers in groups. And that group behavior was much more comfortable for women. The women's cooperative, and we've seen this in Nigeria and many other countries, that the field force, the people on the ground, need to understand agriculture, and they need to be able to meet the farmers where they are, and the products and services need to be adapted very well to the constraints that farmers face. And women often, one of the things that we see in a digital age is that a lot of women are nervous about picking up a digital tool, particularly if it involves financial services. And what they'll do is they'll look at a product and then they'll go back and they'll feel like they really need to, get their husband's buy-in. They need to get approval from their spouse to do it. And then when they go back to the marketplace, there's no one signing anyone up anymore. So there's some real constraints, to a woman's ability to actively adopt and use a product and service. But I will say that, among the active users of Digifarm today, 50% are women. And that is huge, huge progress over the last 5 years. And it's definitely unique, I think, among many of our partners. Although Zanaco Bank in Zambia, 50% of their farmers are women as well. They've really, really been committed to designing the product for women. The product with Zanaco, AgriPay, was designed 100% for women. But out in the field now, it reaches 50% men and 50% women. A very big divide in women's understanding of financial inclusion. Women, can be very, very risk averse, and so you've got to be able to position the product with your go-to-market strategy in a way where women understand that it's accessible and it's reasonable for them. But it can be done. We've definitely seen it in market leaders that these platforms can work just as much for women as they can for men. There's been good and bad. I would direct everyone's attention to the 60 decibels study of smallholder farmers. Every month they're calling smallholder farmers, and taking a measure of their financial health and the realities that they're facing in the market, in agricultural markets. And there's no, it's extremely clear that sources of financing have dried up. Farmers have, financial institutions have taken a big step back. We know financial innovators, who have gone bankrupt during this time. Not a lot of organizations that we've worked with have, just completely left the space, but some have. I think what you're seeing with smallholder farmers right now is that they have been over the last year significantly draining their savings base. In order to stay in the market, the cost of inputs has increased. The sales price of their produce has decreased because of the increased costs of moving food around during the time of COVID, particularly in the first 6 months of the COVID crisis. I think things are stabilizing somewhat, but I mean, you're definitely seeing farmers who their backs are against the wall now. They are down to their last resources, to make food happen, and to make, get inputs and help them grow and get them to market. So, I do think that we are, a lot of actors are saying, oh, food markets are resilient. They're okay. This is not what we're seeing at the smallholder farmer level. And I think there's an incredible need for financial institutions to re-engage in agriculture. And it may look slightly different, but the need is now. And I guess when I said, there's a good side to COVID, we have seen, tremendous innovation across digital channels in reaching smallholder farmers. Insurance companies, just all kinds of companies are growing their farmer base on digital channels because farmers have to go there. A lot of times, the behavior change, the impetus behind behavior change is that you have to do it, and that is this time. So you're seeing organizations that have remained agile and moved to 100% digital or near 100% digital are significantly increasing their farmer outreach. We have seen among our partners an increase from around 5 million farmers to 13 million farmers registered on digital platforms. They're reaching out. They're making the behavior change. They're looking for solutions. We've seen better partnerships come through among organizations because they realize that they need to leverage partnerships in order to stay healthy, stay in the marketplace. So, rural e-commerce players like Copia, are becoming more relevant in an environment where digital services can move markets. Players like WeFarm, I think are extremely important in this time. So, I think we're at the cusp of irretrievable or irreversible change. And hoping that the loan guarantee facilities and the increase in digital data and the increase in digital players in the market, can bring the banks back into the fray. And I think that government needs to hold banks accountable. There's a lot of dormant capital at banks, and they're afraid for real reasons. It's a risky period, but I think one of the things that breaks my heart on an ongoing basis is how much of the risk is transferred to smallholder farmers. It's easy for organizations to step back and leave the business of growing Africa's food to smallholder farmers. And I think we are reaching the point where the farmers are not going to have enough resources to draw on to keep the ball rolling. So highly encourage financial providers to think about re-engaging along digital channels, engage with digital input providers like iProcure, with digital market providers, like Copia or Digifarm, True Trade. There's so many great organizations that are out there that have a digital trail and can reduce risk. Work with players like Pula and Acre. They have massive amounts of data on farmers. They have very big outreach, to farmers. I think there's a lot of opportunity out there, but the financial institutions need to maybe think about new ways in reaching smallholder farmers. And I think the government needs to encourage that type of innovation, just like the government encouraged innovation around M-Pesa. It's time for the government to support banks to leverage things like credit scoring for farmers, and take that step into a more digital world in agriculture. I would say for the donors and development partners, a lot of them have been channeling funding to the banks. in the hopes that the banks would re-engage with strategic subsidy. But I'm not seeing that. Personally, I'm seeing very little activity by the commercial banks yet. I don't think they're quite ready to come in. Where we see the activity are in the farmer-facing organizations. So, the input providers, the market providers, the training providers, they're out there and they're reaching farmers right now. And I think it's those frontline actors, the microfinance institutions, like Musoni, they're out there and they're doing work with farmers right now. So I think that they really need support. I think it's possible that, cash transfers, small cash transfers to farmers to help them rebuild their savings base. Most farmers are very credit averse, and they will draw on their savings until the first and foremost. So I think helping large numbers of farmers through mobile money to rebuild that's their own safety net is really important and very, very feasible in Africa. Rather than locking up money in commercial banks, I think the commercial banks see a lot of risk. I think development actors and government need to work with commercial banks side by side to help them figure out what are the pathways to redeploy capital, down to smallholders. There are great organizations out there like Twiga Foods. There are intermediary organizations that can reach large numbers of farmers, like Twiga Foods, like True Trade, like Digifarm, and reduce a lot of the risk. But banks are usually not comfortable in working with intermediaries. They prefer to manage everything themselves, but in this world, the way that it stands right now, I think that's probably not the best pathway for the banks right now. So if the banks can engage with intermediaries that have good data and large numbers of farmers, and clear pathways, platforms to develop the multiple services farmers need to succeed, I think that's a great plug-in point for the commercial banks to come in behind the platforms, to come in behind the tech innovators. Is a good way. I know the governments are often targeting strategic subsidy to smaller portions of farmers, like 50,000 farmers here to 100,000 farmers there. We're talking about millions of farmers who need to rebuild their financial basis. So I guess one of my recommendations is smaller amounts of unconditional cash transfers to larger numbers of farmers. Just get capital going out in the rural areas again. It's very, very, very much needed. And I think the World Bank is, one of the players that's kind of out there really trying to help make that happen. Many players are. But yeah, in terms of the technology innovators, some of really great institutions went out of business, right as COVID hit, because the impact investors pulled out. So, I do think it's time for impact investors to really re-engage, get back in, and the development players maybe can think about new risk structures behind banks and impact investors, to get the capital flowing again. Institutions are still out there, farmers are still out there, but they need help. I think what's been really fascinating for us is to see this journey of youth between rural and urban areas. Every single young person out there is trying to figure out, they're doing a bunch of side hustles and trying to get educated and, trying to get to town, but, also learning how to farm. And I think we need to be very, realistic about who the youth are and how do we enable them in their journey. It's not all going to be about everybody getting a job in town. It's not all going to be about everybody staying a smallholder farmer in the country. It's going to be about a highly personal journey for young people across the opportunities that they see. I think that there are digital tools out there that can enable and hold young people's hands at those critical junctures where they're making decisions and they're not quite sure which way to go. And they're going to need the full weight of the digital economy behind them as they step forward into a post-COVID world, and try to build their futures. It's going to be very important for them and very important for Africa.